那我来很高兴哈，那我来介绍一下我们今天的这个讲座嘉宾啊。So let me introduce today's speaker, Mr. Rob Morrison. He is a private school teacher of the FERN School in Massachusetts, right? And he teaches English, teaches a lot of things in the school. I'll probably let him introduce himself later. I just heard that he retired. He just got retired from the school, but he's still teaching. And today we are very honored to have him as our first speaker for this AAPI Heritage Month talk series. Mr. Morrison, time is yours.
Well, ni hao, and thank you, Wen, and especially to Kathy Huang for inviting me. I'm honored to be speaking to you during AAPI month, and this talk will be in two parts. The first half will focus on my approach to teaching history and how I became interested in George Frisbee Hoare. And the second part will focus on the results of my class project and what we all learned about Senator Hoare and why he is my personal hero. Let's see. Can everybody see the slides okay? Great.
Wait, Rob, you didn't share yet. Yeah.
Oh. See, I've taught many things. I've taught English, I've taught history, I've taught drama, Shakespeare. Yeah. I've not taught technology. All right, let's try this again. I got to be in Zoom. And there we are. Let's try sharing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I can't see my presentation notes, but
yes, yeah, we can see it.
But I'll make it up as I go along because I think I know what I wanted to say. Okay. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and for our visitors from overseas, here's little Massachusetts. I have 4 children, and I love to travel. Was there to China twice, once very long ago, and then again more recently as a teacher in Hangzhou for a couple of weeks at a bilingual school or school to teach English. I moved to Concord, Massachusetts, and here's Concord, just outside of Boston. It is a town of only 18,000 people, but it has a very prominent position in American history since it was the site of the first battle between the British and the colonists in America. It was also the first location that was town that was located inland. All the other towns in America were on the coast before Concord was settled. Concord is also the home of many authors and writers. So, let's see if I'm moving on. The FENN School is where I teach. I've taught when I was in the business world until I turned 40. And here's the FENN School. We got here. The boys here at the FENN School. It's a private school. It's and it's for boys 4th grade through 9th grade, which translates to about 10 to 15 years old. And I taught there for 23 years. And let's escape out of this. Sorry. I got a little too clever with my technology.
No problem.
We've got to get out of the problem is the bar is covering it. covering my bar. There we go. Back to my presentation. All right, that's the last time I do that. Sorry. Too many windows open. All right, so I would teach a 7th grade class on immigration. And in this class, I'm sorry, I've lost my notes again. Here we go. And in this class, excuse me, 7th grade history class, we'd have a unit on immigration. The immigration unit would cover waves of the Native Americans coming in from the West, and then Europeans come in, and then usually there were 2 or 3 days we'd teach about Chinese immigration. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is fairly familiar, I'm sure, to all of you, but this is basically the way I used to teach the record of Chinese Americans and the wave of their immigration and the consequences. So you'll see there are a lot of dates and a lot of, I'm sorry, this is going through the wrong way. Times, numbers, and there were basically 3 stories we'd focused on, of course, the gold rush, Chinese railroad workers, and finally, the backlash. I apologize for the racist images that follow, but it was important for the boys to learn the level of hatred or the level of vitriol that was present in America at the time. So, anti-Chinese history. This was all, again, part of the standard curriculum. Again, too many names, too many dates. So I tried to make it a little more interesting with more primary source documents, such as this quotation from a Chinese man: American laws are fierce like tigers. People are jailed inside wooden walls, detained, interrogated, tortured, birds plunged into an open trap. Oh, suffering. Tragedy, to whom can I complain? I yell to the sky, there's no way out. If only I had known the difficulty of passing the Golden Gate. Fed up with this treatment, I regret my journey here. I am innocent, yet I'm treated guilty. How can I take this? When can I get out of this prison and find happiness? So it was important for me to teach empathy in this unit, to teach for the boys to understand how difficult and unkind some of the conditions were. We'd also look at cartoons, primary source documents. Again, this is a fairly famous cartoon showing American immigrants or African Americans, Irish, Scottish, Norwegians. All these immigrants are building up a wall, and the wall is laws against race, jealousy, and this man with the mortar is the congressional laws, so legislation. So the laws were making these walls, and here we have the Chinese breaking down the original wall as they're coming here, and we're building a new wall. So this would create a lot of discussion around these images. An American washing machine company, another American washing machine company. Not all the images were negative. This is a rather positive image saying that communists and Irish radicals and hoodlums are all welcome into the gates, golden gates of liberty, but we draw the line with the Chinese, even though they bring industry and order, peace, and sobriety. So this would create discussions. Taking a look at this picture, we talked a little bit about the Spanish-American War, where America gained territory from the Spanish, including the Philippine Islands, which were American territory. And you can see that there was this idea that the Philippines, once we quote unquote civilize the Philippines, we'll move on to China. And China here wants us because we have all this technology equipment, and we can bring so much and sell so much into China. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the resistance to the Chinese Exclusion Act, and here's George Frisbee Hoare. And this is what I really want to focus on. So this was unit started really as an accident. In the summer of 2010, there was a short-lived museum called the Boston Museum, Immigration Museum, and in there was a poster on the wall, and it had this quotation. And I said, I think I know that name, George Frisbee Hoare. I think that guy was from Concord. And so I went home and I looked it up, and sure enough, he was from Concord. And I was intrigued. Why would they be ringing bells a morning for him in Shanghai when he died? I did some research on him, and it turns out he was a senator 5 times elected from Massachusetts. And he'd grown up in Concord. And I said, wow, how do I not know this man? And again, more importantly, why did he care about the Chinese? Well, quick look at available resources, and I could see that he was one of 15 senators that voted against the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. He was a leader amongst the Republicans. 10 years later, when the Geary Act came, which was the extension of the Chinese Exclusion Act, there were 5 votes against the Geary Act. And then 10 years later, when the Geary Act was extended, they modified some of the immigration laws, made them a little less onerous, made them a little more forgiving. So they had unanimous vote for it, except for 1 vote. So the House of Representatives was unanimous, the Senate was unanimous. But George Frisbee Hoare rose up against the continuation of the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was all fascinating stuff, but I had no idea why. So I set the groundwork a little bit with the beginning of the immigration unit, and then I took the boys to the museum myself, and I said, "Hey, look at this poster over here. We know that name, Hoare." And the boys started being interested, and they said, "Well, let's go. Let's do some research on him." So we created a little unit, and our central question is, why should George Frisbee Hoare care about the Chinese? We did some brainstorming on it, and the boys came up with some lovely ideas. One of them said, well, he must have had some Chinese friends when he was in middle school, when he was growing up in his neighborhood. So they were relating to the question, but they really had a lot of ignorance when it came to the issues of immigration. So we started with this brainstorming. Then we made a list of subjects that we thought we needed to research. And then we created research teams where the boys broke up into groups of 3 or 4 and tackled 1 of 5 different questions. Oh, by the way, my class, I believe I had 14 boys in the class. It's all boys. And as a private school, I have the flexibility to not have to teach 2 state-mandated history courses. So I was able to carve out some time in the curriculum for this unit. So we took him on a field trip to the birthplace of George Frisbee Hoare and where he grew up in Concord. There was some giggling about the name we went to the Concord whorehouse, but I only let the boys joke about his name for 1 day. That was it. After that, you had to be dead serious and solemn when we mentioned the name George Frisbee Hoare. Took him out to Worcester to see where he spent much of his time. There's 2 statues to him out in Worcester. There are no statues to him in Concord. So here were our research teams. One researched anti-Chinese racism in America, the history of Chinese in Massachusetts, George Frisbee Hoare's childhood and early career, his life in the Senate, and his Republican Party, what was happening in his Republican Party over the 20 years he was in office. So they broke up into teams and did some research with available resources. This is really pre-Wikipedia days, so using books and using our local library, we went into the special collections of the Concord Library, and also had our librarian bring in resources for us. Then we discovered that there were boxes and boxes, crates and crates of his personal papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society in Boston. So a group of 3 volunteers agreed to come in with me at night to go into Boston to go into research these boxes. And we could see from the inventory that there were 3 things that were diaries of George Frisbee Hoare in one of the boxes. So we said, okay, now we're going to finally find out his personal feelings, his true beliefs about the Chinese and why he's such a supporter of the Chinese. So we went through the boxes and found his three diaries, 3 journals, and what they contained was lists of people he owed money to and people who owed money to him, his address, meetings. There was nothing personal in them. It was so disappointing. But it was really actually a fascinating moment to share with the boys how hard it is to do research and how hard writing history can be sometimes. So we had fun anyway. We went back and started looking at some of these primary sources again. Here's a picture of George Frisbee Hoare. He's down in the bottom here as one of the 5 members voting against the quicksand of public opinion. Interestingly, even in Massachusetts, most people supported the Chinese Exclusion Act, even though there were so few Chinese in Massachusetts. They had heard there had been such a publicity campaign out of California against the Chinese. There had been, we did find that there had been Chinese in Massachusetts since 1850, where they were brought in as replacement workers for striking. I believe they were textile workers out in Adams, Massachusetts. But yeah, even in Massachusetts, this stand he took was unpopular. However, he kept getting reselected for the Senate. I think he was respected for holding true to his values and holding true to his stance. George Frisbee Hoare was an anti-imperialist. So the cartoonist loved playing with the word auntie, auntie. So they were punning on the word auntie, and they always made him look like a little old aunt. So here's his name here, Hoare, and he's protecting, in this case, Colombia, and I think that's the Philippines, against the imperialism of the U.S. as the U.S. was trying to dig a canal through Colombia and was refusing to accept Filipino independence after having supported Filipino independence from the Spanish, once we became once we were ceded the territory from the Spanish, we changed our tune and said, we're going to take over the Philippines. And that here is George Frisbee Hoare with his band of warriors here, and they're defeated about, in this case, Hawaiian, the issue of sovereignty for Hawaii. Up on the pedestal here, as they're trying to pull down these little old ladies, all these anti-imperialists against the imperial powers of America as we set up colonies across the world, or mostly in the Caribbean and in the Philippines. Here's George Frisbee Hoare trying to push them down at the top. Again, Auntie Hoare, looking after the Philippines in this case. They really got brutal. This is him at the end of his career. And the caption down here, it says, in his second childhood. Like the people of color are just little dolls to him, and he's complaining and whining. Because he was complaining all the time. And this may be my favorite of these Puck illustrations. Puck was this magazine that came out with these beautiful, powerful political cartoons. It was a real art form of the day. This is George Frisbee Hoare as Cassandra from Greek mythology. And Cassandra was wife of Julius Caesar, I believe. Now, anyway, Cassandra had this power that she could see the future. She had this great power that she could see the future. She knew what was right. But she also had the curse that no one would believe her. And that is actually true for George Frisbee Hoare. He knew he was right, and nobody else believed him. Everybody else. Here's the President of the United States. Here's the, I can't remember, Secretary of State or something. There's his cabinet. These are all Republicans in the same party with him. Actually, can't remember if the president was a Democrat at that time. But anyway, they're all laughing at him and all his protestations in favor of the Chinese. So after we had done our research, and what did we find? We found, again, there was very little footprint of Chinese in Massachusetts. So the Chinatown had been established in Boston during this time, but he lived a very solitary life in Washington, so probably had very little interaction with Chinese people personally. We learned a lot about his childhood and his family. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then we learned about his political stance in the Republican Party, which had been the party of Lincoln, anti-slavery, had evolved during the latter half of the 19th century to dissolve into two different directions. And George Frisbee Hoare is on the far liberal side of the Republican Party, while the rest of the Republican Party was getting more and more imperialist and in some ways conservative. We took all our information, and the most important information we really found out was about his family. George Frisbee Hoare, is someone who was a 5-time senator in Massachusetts, was probably the oh, very nice. Looks like we've been bombed. Oh, sorry, folks. We've got somebody has been we're going to have to close this out. I really apologize. But just, I wonder if we can go off screen, stop share. Can you see me?
Yeah. So sorry. Let me check who is doing that. Yeah.
Well, that's, I guess, a problem with Zoom. I haven't been using it since COVID, but I've heard a lot of these horror stories of people having this happen to them on their screen share. But let me continue on.
Yeah, please. Yeah, sorry.
So these 12-year-old boys got pretty passionate about it. I've got a paper here. I'll read a little excerpt of it from a boy, from 3 boys who wrote about George Frisbee Hoare's political professional life. Well, I was just saying about George Frisbee Hoare. He may be the third or fourth most famous person in his own family. His father was the kind of equivalent of the power broker in the town of Concord. He was a many-time representative. Everybody went to him if they had problems or issues. His grandfather had been a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. His brother was the Attorney General of the United States. So it was a very politically connected family. They really were the start of the Republican Party in Massachusetts. So they were a very strong influence on him. And probably the most important person that influenced him was his mother. His mother was a leader of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society. She was an ardent abolitionist, and they were all ardent abolitionists, believing in the rights of African Americans. It was only 17 years between the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the vote on the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. And for someone who had truly heartfelt beliefs, how could you go from defending the rights of African Americans to attacking the rights of the Chinese? And so I think he was always true to his own personal values that he were instilled through his mother and through his family. So that's what the conclusion we came up with. Nowhere did it say in his writings, he wrote an autobiography. Nowhere does it really say, I support the Chinese because of this. I think he just felt that all men deserved to be respected. So yeah, I just want to read a little bit of this that was written by one of my students. He said, George Frisbee Hoare is not a well-known politician, but when you dig deeper, you find out his decisions. You found out about the decisions he made as a politician. Some of his votes that he made in Congress still affect the lives over 100 years later. Hoare's professional life was riddled with tough decisions that he made, including the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Geary Act of 1892, and should never be overlooked. George Frisbee Hoare was a lonely man in the Senate. He was a rebel, not voting for what your party wanted you to vote for. What happened to most all of the people in both houses in Washington, but he voted for what he actually believed in when he looked into his heart. He would vote about something that he could make a genuine argument about, and he would always make sure that he was heard when nobody wanted to hear him. The best part about researching Senator George Frisbee Hoare is that all of his bizarre beliefs were morally correct. There was nothing wrong with the Chinese. There was nothing wrong with the Philippine people. His actions made people ask, why would he do something like this? And back when he lived, they could not find an answer to that question because society is a century behind him. George Frisbee Hoare was a genius, just like Albert Einstein, but instead of scientists being only a decade behind his law of relativity, society is a full century before realizing that the senator was right in all of his choices that he made in his 17-year term until his death. Senator George Frisbee Hoare was a thinker when others weren't. He could feel empathy in others, and he wasn't afraid to stand alone. So that's part of what we did. So the boys each created their own project. One of the boys did a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation about him. Another did an assembly before the whole school. A couple of the boys created a rap song about George Frisbee Hoare. That was a very interesting one. One did a documentary of the whole project. Another did a poem. Some wrote letters to the newspaper and to magazines. So each of them had to do a writing component for this project to talk about George Frisbee Hoare. Another one did a children's book, illustrated book about his standing up for the Chinese. So each of them enjoyed it, and then we all left and became. I'm gonna share some of the pictures, physical pictures I have. But we walked down about 1.5 miles to the cemetery in Sleepy Hollow in Concord, and there we went to his gravesite. And let's see. And at his grave, there's the boys at George Frisbee Hoare's grave. I don't know if you can see it. My lovely class. One of them. And on the back is these words. And the boys have to read these words. And once they've read them, they've become official members of the George Frisbee Hoare Appreciation Society. And the words go like this. I have no faith in fatalism, in destiny, in blind force. I believe in God, the living God. I believe in the American people and a free and brave people who do not bow their neck or bend their knee to any other, and who desire no other to bow their neck or bend their knee to them. I believe that a republic is greater than an empire. I believe, finally, whatever clouds may darken the horizon, that the world is growing better, that today is better than yesterday, and that tomorrow will be better than today. So it's that optimism that I try to carry with me when things get dark. And I try to instill that in my students. I'm going to repeat that last bit. Whenever clouds may darken the horizon, I believe that the world is growing better, that today is better than yesterday, and that tomorrow will be better than today. So, and every year since then, for the last 10 years, I've brought the boys down there, and we have a little ceremony, and then we do an English tradition, which is you go to the professor's house, and we have a little snack, we have a cup of tea at the professor's house. I don't know. Do you think? I don't know if I can dare go back to that.
Yeah, Rob. Yeah, you can try. I actually removed those bombers.
Bombers. Yeah.
Hopefully.
It's so interesting.
I enabled waiting rooms, so hopefully they won't be able to get in. Yeah.
I've heard about this happening, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, this is the first time I saw.
Well done. Thank you so much, Juan.
I was not prepared, so it took me some time to remove them.
Let's see if speaker. So here's some pictures of him. I'm not sure why this is. But here's another crop of boys. Every year, 14 to 28 boys, depending how many I was teaching that year, come down. I think this was my last year, this last May. It's maybe the last crop of young men who became members of the George Frisbee Hoare Appreciation Society. In May, I took this rather tattered, laminated, dusty poster off the wall after it being on the wall for 15 years. For 15 years, it sat there and made people question, who's that guy? And boy, did they lost a half an hour to their life when they asked that question, because again, George Frisbee Hoare became my personal hero because he was brave enough to stand up to all that ridicule, all that bad press. Even the people who elected him were against him. But he stood by his principles, and history has proven him right. So I'd love to answer any questions if people may have it. And I apologize for I don't know if it was a problem on my end or what about the bombing that we had in the middle of that.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I think it's Zoom's vulnerability. So the bombers happens. I heard a lot of those incidents, but this is the first time I saw in my Zoom room. Okay, thank you. Yeah, for the audience, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat window, and Rob will answer those questions. Yeah, thank you. And I think Rob just explained a little bit detail about his projects, and it's so detailed. I think I'm not sure if there's any teacher in the audience. Maybe I think we can maybe just learn from this experience.
Actually, yeah. I had to speak without my speaker notes for some reason. I don't know why technology was failing me here. But one of the points I wanted to make that I forgot is that one of my favorite parts of teaching history are to create projects like this, where I am exploring a question that I do not know the answer to. So I always, as a history teacher, many history teachers want to know everything before they get in front of their students. They don't feel comfortable unless they have a total background. They don't feel comfortable saying, I don't know. In this case, I start off with, I don't know. Let's find out. I don't know why George Frisbee Hoare would care about the Chinese in this case. And together, with my guidance and my resources and my experience, we search for an answer and we work it out. It didn't always work. I think I created about 6 or 7 of these projects, and I think one of them fell flat. We never really found an answer to the questions that we were probing. But the others, I think, are some of the most memorable teaching that I did. And I think when I talk to my old students, those are the projects that they remember from their school life here back at the FENN school. So I used to call that teaching without a net. It's like tightrope walking with no net underneath you, because you could fall and fail and look bad, but you know, life is short and might as well take some risks.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question from Wei. Can you read the chat, or do you want me to read it to you?
Let's see. I've got it in Chinese.
Yeah, well, it's in English. He says, thank you very much for services and sharing. I think it's not easy for 7th grader to understand this history, but your teaching is full of wise guidance. What do you think will be the impact of teaching American students the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act? How do they feel and feedback after learning this period of time, history?
You know, I never want my students to feel shameful for who they are or what their life. But there are many dark periods of American history that are important to know and to adjust to and to be aware of. So I think to understand the power of prejudice, not just against African Americans, but to see how it can be brought to bear in such a virulent and ugly way against other races and other people. I think that's really important for them to know that racism isn't just what happened to people who used to be enslaved.
Okay.
Let's see.
Let me see. A note from Nali. She said, I like your approach about finding out the answer together. So we haven't found out why he supported us, meaning Mr. Ho.
Yeah, I think the reason again was because his whole family and his upbringing. Oh, they're back.
Oh no. Shoot.
Stop sharing. Such idiots.
Yeah, and okay, I removed her.
So I give credit to his mother. His mother as the one who set these values in George Frisbee Hoare, that all men are created equal, that you don't judge people by their appearance or their skin color. He wrote about that also. I have other writings here of that. It's kind of dry, but let's see. I hold that every human soul has its rights, dependent upon the individual personal worth, and not dependent on their color or race, and that all races, all colors, all nationalities contain persons entitled to be recognized everywhere they go on the face of the earth as the equals of every other man. So, everybody likes to, and everybody likes to think that they are good people. Everybody likes to think that they are not prejudiced. I mean, most people like to think they're not prejudiced. But when push comes to shove, when it's everybody against you, are you willing to stand up for what you believe? He was a really old man at that point. And he died in office a few months later, but he stood up almost like a filibuster to register that vote of protest. That, they may have made the law a little less. I can't remember exactly because it's been a while since I taught this unit, how they made the 1902 version of the Chinese Exclusion Act not quite so bad, but it was still bad. And it was still just based on race. And George Frisbee Hoare refused to accept that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A question from Kathy. She says, would you tell students in case after the research you could not find conclusion? Are you concerned that your class think they lost time on this topic, or the principal does not like the idea?
Well, fortunately, again, teaching in a private school, I think I'm teaching research. I'm teaching methodology. I'm teaching the process as opposed to the numbers and the names. Nowadays, numbers and names you can look up in these kids are so fast on the computer, they can give you an answer to the date or the name of somebody. But the reasons why somebody does something, those are questions that are much more difficult to answer. Now, the one project I had that sort of failed was again based in Concord. about 50 years after the town was settled, 1/4 of the residents of the town moved out of the town. It was called the Great Migration. They left the town and moved to Connecticut. And I said, and nobody's really understood why they did that. So I had the boys research why they did that. And I had them look at all the names and the genealogies and the literature and this and that. In the end of the day, we never really came up with a convincing solution. However, I didn't consider it a waste of time because it was the process that was more important than the answers.
Yeah, true. And following comments from Kathy. I admire your belief in racial equity, but are you concerned that if someone near you has opposite view and will defriend you because you stand up for Chinese?
That's I think the interesting conundrum. How do you be tolerant to intolerance?
Right.
There are boys, fortunately not so much now in the school, but when we first came to the school, who had strong beliefs against homophobia. And it was religious belief, and they were of a certain religion that taught that relationships between men were evil. And what do we do with that? For us, we could say, this is the values of the school. We have stated values of our school. We have a mission statement, and your beliefs do not conform to our values and our mission statement. So they had to adjust, or they had to withdraw their student from our school if you were going to feel those racial that prejudice. Now, when it comes to anti-Asian prejudice, it's an interesting conundrum, especially in the private school world, because there's an overpopulation. There's such a demand from the Asian community in this area in Greater Boston for access to private schools such as the FENN school. We had, I think over the couple of years I was teaching at FENN, we had 2 or 3 people who moved from China to attend a day school in Concord, Massachusetts. They bought a house here so their boy could go to this school. And that's a lot of investment, and and so there's a lot of people who want to come into the school, and they do wonderful work, and we've had a lot of great leadership out of Asian American young boys at our school. But then as they are going to try to get into these secondary schools that are feeder schools into the Ivy League, into Harvard and to Yale and so on, it becomes even harder. It becomes harder and harder for them to access that pathway. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I hope that gives you a little taste of some of the things we experience here.
Okay, yeah. So you mentioned in your speech that because of the private school, you can have your own curriculum, right? So why did you choose to teach Chinese immigration history, among other many historical moments? And in your school, does any other teachers teach that, or it's just you?
I think the part that I explained in the beginning, which is about the laws and the numbers and the gold rush, the railroad workers, and then the racist backlash. Those 3 things are pretty standard in the curriculum, 2 to 3 days. This was more like 3 weeks carved out. That because I knew I could envision that I wanted to end up with this writing project where the boys could all choose a different form of writing, different form of expressing their ideas, that I knew I would need about 3 weeks to do this for my class. And Um, the there's freedom within the curriculum as long as you're teaching a unit about immigration, how you teach that unit. There's a fair amount of freedom within my school in that 7th grade history curriculum. I was also an 8th grade English teacher. I would teach the play Macbeth, whereas my colleague would teach the Odyssey, and I would not teach the Odyssey, and he would not teach Macbeth, but they would still get an experience with traditional literature. So yes, that's one of the great parts about being a private school teacher, is that, at least at my school, that there isn't a lot of oversight, direction, criticism of your teaching method, as long as you are getting to the finish line and the boys have a strong educational experience for that year and for their whole career. I personally found it some of the most fun I had was going to teach after my passions. You can't teach all of history. You try and teach American history. I've seen so many 11th grade curriculums, and they try and pack every little detail of the French and Indian Wars and the Spanish and American Wars and all these wars. They don't teach about people's lives, and they don't teach about things that impact the students today. They never get to the civil rights movement. They never get beyond World War II. So they, for the last 80 years of history, don't get touched. So what's the point? You're just teaching old history.
Okay, thank you. There's one from Ed. How to make your teaching material more widely available and distributed?
That's a good question. And I've been, Kathy asked me about that also, because I really would love to see. I know in Illinois, I believe, now they're mandating API.
Yeah, a few states have already, put it into law. Yeah.
So the primary source documents are available. They're out there. I think within the Chinese community of Boston, at least, the name George Frisbee Hoare has become honored, and I think that is wonderful. There are other people who are European descent who stood up for Asian Americans and stood up for other races over time. But I would be glad to share what I have, and I hate to see my legacy retire with me. So that's why I was pleased to when Kathy asked me to do this, even though I said I haven't done a Zoom since COVID, so I was a little confused.
Okay, great. That's great. So, and you mentioned to me that you can share your slides with the audience, right?
Yes. And
okay.
Hopefully not the illustrated version.
Okay, yeah. So a question from Rex. So he said, "Hi, what exactly the definition of the word American has become since 1965 Immigration Act? Does it mean only U.S. citizen?" This is, yeah.
Well, it's actually a really interesting word, because I like to use it in a really general sense. Canadians, you're from America, right?
Yeah.
Brazilians, you're from the Americas. Mexicans, you're from the Americas. So I try to diffuse the power of the word a little bit. I'm very proud to be a citizen of the United States, but I feel like jingoism, wrapping things up in flags, is not who I am. And to say America's the greatest, America's first. Now, what does it mean to be an American since 1966? I mean, it's it is constantly a pull and tug, and it is a battle with the tides of time. Again, we've been gone through a dark period, I feel, and we're still going through that dark period. But I like to keep those words of George Frisbee Hoare, that despite all the darkness, today's better than yesterday, and tomorrow will be better than today. So we tend to focus so much on the problems. We hear about the horrible things that happen in the world, and we don't hear enough about the wonderful things that happen in the world, the progress that's being made in Africa, the progress that's the revolutions of economies in Southeast Asia. So many of these things are underreported in the U.S. press. So we have to stay optimistic.
Okay. Yeah. A question from Laura Liu. Sorry that I missed the first part. Was Mr. Hoare a Quaker or influenced by Quaker philosophy?
Good question. No, he was a Congregationalist, which is a Protestant sect in New England. He believed in God. He talked about divine principles in people. I don't think he believed in a white man dressed in robes up in our clouds. The town of Concord is the home of transcendentalism philosophy, a major force of American philosophy. Emerson, Thoreau, Alcott, these people who created a philosophy. Most of the people in the Hoare family were very, very familiar with it and very familiar with those individuals. They were friends. And so they were very much influenced by transcendentalism. In other words, that you find God in nature, and many of those principles also coincide with Chinese philosophies.
And she had a not follow-up question, another question. Did he have any close personal relationships with anyone of Chinese descent?
I couldn't find it.
Couldn't find it.
Certainly nobody growing up here when he was here. There's some research being done about the Chinese history of Chinese American history in Concord. I mean, as I said, it was a small town, and back in his day, it was more like 4,000 or 5,000 people. But I don't think there were any Chinese. The only Chinese that would have been in the Boston area in his youth would have been sailors coming off the ships. A few people coming into starting Chinatown, and many of whom had been out in the Western Mass as strike breakers who were brought in to replace workers, and they did a good job, I think, and so there was some backlash to that because they were breaking up unions. Well, there weren't unions, but breaking up workers' rights.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned that since 1850 there are Chinese there, right? Came there.
But I did not find any. That's what it was really interesting. The boy said, "Oh, he must have had Chinese friends. That's why he liked Chinese people." But that's we never found anything like that. Not saying it couldn't have been true.
Okay, and you said Mr. Hoare has voted against the Chinese Exclusion Act and the following thing, right? So does anyone else, like in Massachusetts or Connecticut, vote against? Or
so in the original 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, I think it was about 200 members of the House of Representatives voted for it, and 30 members voted against it. Most of them were from the Northeast. And then when the Geary Act came up 10 years later in 1892, there were only 5 representatives left. who voted against it. And I believe the other 4 were from Connecticut. So they were from the Northeast also. And then by 1902, he was the only one left. So they'd either been voted out of office or had retired. But the new wave of people coming in were all for taking over the rest of the world. And honestly, China was mentioned many times as being a target for imperialist expansion out of the U.S. Once the people of the Philippines see how wonderful our government and all our Western goods and civilization is, all the other peoples of Southeast Asia will welcome America as their new ruler. I mean, that was the kind of mindset of the imperialists in America, and something that Hor vehemently fought. His greatest fight may have been for the rights of the Filipinos. Actually, it was between the Filipinos and the Chinese that he fought his hardest battles, both losing in both cases, but being a thorn in people's side, making them think, making them question. You could see how many covers of the magazine were dedicated to mocking him. So if he wasn't making people feel uncomfortable, they wouldn't bother to mock him.
Okay, yeah, and one comment from Peter. Thanks for sharing the experience. I learned something today. This is an interesting way to study history and be inspired. If I may, I suggest you may also include some Chinese Americans who impacted US history. People like Wang Kim are Chinese Americans who were victims, but they were not passive. They always struggled against the oppression onto them. When we do it this way, then Chinese Americans will just be a group to be pitied, but be respected. That's a interesting thought. Yeah.
No, absolutely correct. And I think a lot of that work is always done at our school on a kind of more global level, especially during May, when the undertold stories of Asian Americans are highlighted. And it's important not to paint Chinese as victims, as helpless, as there are so many people who have excelled and have contributed so greatly to our economy ever since the 1840s. So your comment is spot on, and it is something that I think is important to finish a unit like this with.
Great. And thank you so much. Oh, you haven't mentioned your connection with Chinese people or China. You've visited China before, right? Can you? Yeah.
Yeah. So you saw the picture of me sitting on the Great Wall I was over there with my wife to be and some other people, and got to go to China and Hong Kong. And back in '87. So it was a very, very, very different China than the one I saw 30 years later when I went to teach. But in the middle of that, my grandmother had always told me about this man who was a gentleman named W.A.P. Martin. And it's Wallace Allen Pearson Martin, I believe, something like that.
Yeah.
And he was a missionary. Here's his picture. Presbyterian who came to China and as on a missionary mission, but he became a translator, and he actually acted as the translator for the Burlingame Treaty, which was the treaty that opened up the United States to the Chinese, that this would allow free travel of Chinese people to America and American people to China. And that was a really optimistic treaty after the Opium Wars and so on. So it was really seen at some point that there was going to be really great relationships between China and the United States. And as I said in my slides, there was some economic backlash in the U.S., or there was a downturn in the U.S., and so people start, who's the problem? Who caused it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, those other people, those people who are others. They must be the trouble. So, but he stayed in China, and he translated many books. He wrote, let's see what I got here. He wrote these books.
Wow, quite a few.
He wrote The Awakening of China,
Mm-hmm.
The Lore of Cathay, Chinese, The Cycle of Cathay, The Siege of Peking. But he became the inaugural president of what was to become Peking University and is now today Beijing University. So he was the first president.
Yeah.
He was a Mandarin third-class translator for the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
So he joined the civil service in China, but he also he translated a number of books about international law into Chinese and international relations into Chinese. So he really helped open up pathways for Chinese into America. And so this is my great, great, great uncle.
Wow.
My grandmother had collected his books and had always told me about him. So it was fun to teach a little bit. I taught a little bit about him when I was in China. So I taught about, and then we did a play. I was working with mostly younger kids, but we did it. The kids wrote a play in English about ping pong diplomacy, and they reenacted the whole ping pong diplomacy breakdown and the reestablishment of early connection during the Nixon period. So that was fun. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. So it was in Hangzhou, right? When you teach the kids in China, Hangzhou, right?
Oh, by the way, yes, Martin was also the first translator of the story of Mulan into English. So Disney should give Martin credit.
Oh, okay. W.A.P. Martin. Yeah, he was the first president of nowadays Beijing University. Yeah.
Do I dare go back to my slides for a second?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't have the other picture of him. Sorry, not in this version. Yeah, there's a great picture of him in front of all the students, all in traditional black robes, and he is too. But he stands out as a little bit taller, and at Beijing University. So I'm sorry. That's
yeah.
I thought I had it.
Just posted a picture in the chat, and
oh yeah, you can look it up. It's online of him in front of the first. What was the original name of it?
He even had a Chinese name, Ding Wei. Yeah.
Yeah, they say he was a translator, and I think he was the highest class Mandarin in amongst all the Westerners in China.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
So maybe that's another story for another day.
Oh,
right?
yeah. We like to invite you to be back to tell us about his story.
Well, I apologize for some of the shortcomings in my technology. As I said, I had to do it off the top of my head, but these are really important and powerful stories. I love that my personal hero is being discovered and celebrated. He was probably a man with as many problems and foibles and weaknesses as any other. He was just this old white pudgy guy. But darn, he had a heart of steel. He had a backbone. He didn't bend against public opinion.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, you did a wonderful job. Actually, I think I learned a lot from what you are telling us, a lot of history thing. I didn't even know much about Mr. Hall. So yeah, that's really great. And I'm glad that in the audience, many are interested in your teaching methods, the way of teaching history, and the projects you have made. And yeah, I think we can learn a lot, and we can help to spread this this method around, and you know.
I just want to simplify one thing, and that is, I like to ask questions I don't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the simplest question to ask a student that I don't know the answer to is, what do you think? Right? What do you think is, I think, a very simple question to ask a boy at or a girl. And I think it's an important, valid question to continue to keep asking students. It's because you don't know. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, someone is trying to share the screen, but yeah, I think it's about time. And please continue. Yeah, if you.
No, I would tell you, I had these great videos of some boys. My daughter, actually, my daughter-in-law speaks fluent Mandarin.
Oh.
And she was doing the studies of in China, and so my daughter was over there, and she sent me back all these snacks from China, all the different types of snacks, all written in Chinese. And I gave them each different one to my students, and they all filmed each other opening them and trying them, and then judging them on a scale of 1 to 10. And they tried the prawn flavored crisps that were tofu, part potato chip, part tofu, part shrimp, and not bad, not bad. And so most of the kids liked the snack that they got, but one poor boy got spicy tofu. A tiny little packet of spicy tofu. Took a little, and it just, his face exploded. He went running out of the room, got water. I could have gotten in big trouble with the school nurse, I think, if who I was giving. I checked if any boys had allergies, but maybe they couldn't read the ingredient packages on it. But it was a really fun thing, and that's probably what they remember most of my unit teaching Chinese history to the 9th graders, the older boys. So anyway, it was fun to try to keep it spiced up.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks again for this wonderful topic.
Well, thank you for your moderation here, and to Kathy for inviting me. And thank you to the great questions in the audience, and I hope you appreciate it.